What happens when a member of the British royal family sits down for what should be a friendly chat show appearance, only to find themselves facing the most brutal interrogation of their life? What we witnessed on The View that day wasn't just an interview. It was a calculated takedown that left Prince Harry visibly shaken, struggling to maintain his composure as the cameras rolled. By the end of this encounter, the Duke of Sussex would be rushing off the set with tears in his eyes, his carefully crafted public image crumbling under the relentless pressure of a host who seemed determined to expose every vulnerability, every contradiction, every painful truth he'd been trying to hide. If you want to see how one of the most powerful media personalities in America systematically dismantled a prince on live television, make sure you subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments what you think really happened behind the scenes. Now let's dive into this shocking confrontation that had everyone talking. The studio lights were blazing as Prince Harry walked onto the View set, his usual confident smile firmly in place. He'd done countless interviews since stepping back from royal duties, promoting his book, his Netflix series, his various charitable endeavors. This was supposed to be another friendly chat, another opportunity to share his story with a sympathetic audience. The producers had assured his team it would be a supportive environment, focusing on his mental health advocacy and his new life in America. But from the moment Whoopi Goldberg looked up from her notes, there was something different in her eyes, something harder than the warm welcome he'd been expecting. The other co-hosts, Joy Behar, Sarah N., Sunny Hostin, and Alyssa Farah Griffin, seemed to sense the shift in energy too. The usual pre-show banter felt forced, the smiles a little too bright, the atmosphere charged with an undercurrent of tension that made everyone on set uncomfortable. "So Harry," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that unmistakable authority that had made her one of the most respected figures in television. "Let's talk about your book, Spare." Interesting title choice. Makes me wonder, what exactly are you sparing us from, and what are you choosing to reveal? Harry shifted slightly in his chair, his media training kicking in as he launched into his well-rehearsed response about wanting to tell his truth, about the importance of mental health awareness, about breaking the cycle of pain within his family. But Whoopi wasn't nodding along like the other hosts usually did. She was studying him with the intensity of a prosecutor examining a witness, waiting for something, watching for cracks in his polished facade. "Your truth," she repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "That's a phrase you use a lot. Your truth, your story, your perspective. But here's what I'm struggling with. Harry, you've spent years now telling us about how terrible your life was in the palace, how trapped you felt, how misunderstood you were. But millions of people watched you grow up. We saw you at your mother's funeral. We saw you serve in Afghanistan. We saw you laugh and joke and seem genuinely happy at public events. So help me understand, when exactly did this narrative of misery begin?" The question hit like a physical blow. Harry's carefully constructed smile faltered for just a moment, and in that instant, everyone in the studio could see the real person beneath the public persona. His hands, which had been resting comfortably on the armrests of his chair, tightened slightly. His jaw clenched, almost imperceptibly, but Whoopi saw it all. "I mean," she continued, her voice gaining momentum, "you talk about being trapped, but you had opportunities most people could never dream of. You had a platform to make real change. You had resources. You had support. You could have used your position to advocate for mental health from within the system, couldn't you? Instead, you chose to burn it all down and then profit from the ashes." "I wouldn't characterize it that way," Harry replied, his voice tighter than before. "The decision to step back wasn't easy. It was about protecting my family, about creating a safe environment for my wife and children." "Your wife," Whoopi said, leaning forward slightly. "Let's talk about Meghan. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like a lot of these problems started when she came into the picture." Now, I'm not saying that's her fault, but the timeline is pretty clear, isn't it? You seemed content enough with your royal role until you met her. Then suddenly, everything about your life became unbearable. The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. This wasn't the gentle, supportive questioning Harry had expected. This was an interrogation, and Whoopi was just getting started. "That's not fair," Harry said, his voice rising slightly. "Meghan didn't change me. She helped me see what I already knew deep down. She helped me find the courage to break free from a system that was suffocating both of us." "Suffocating," Whoopi repeated, her eyebrows raised. Interesting word choice. Because from the outside, it looked like you two were living in palaces, wearing designer clothes, traveling the world, having access to the finest of everything. If that's suffocating, I'd love to know what freedom looks like. "It's not about material things," Harry protested, his composure starting to crack. "It's about being able to live authentically, being able to speak your truth without fear of retribution." There's that phrase again, your truth. But Harry, truth isn't subjective. Truth is truth. And the truth is, you've made millions of dollars telling the world how awful your family is. You've exposed private conversations, shared intimate details about people who can't defend themselves because of their positions. Your own father, your brother, your stepmother. How is that living authentically? How is that not just revenge? The color drained from Harry's face. His hands were visibly trembling. Now, and he kept glancing toward the exit as if calculating how quickly he could escape. But Whoopi wasn't done. She was like a hunter who had scented blood, and she was moving in for the kill. "And let's talk about the contradictions," she continued relentlessly. "You say you want privacy, but you've done more interviews in the past 3 years than you did in your entire life as a working royal. You say you want to protect your children, but you've made them the subject of international controversy. You say you love your family, but you've spent years publicly humiliating them. Which is it, Harry? Because it can't be all of those things at once." Harry's breathing was becoming more labored. Sweat was beginning to form on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. The other co-hosts were exchanging worried glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the interview, but unwilling to interrupt Whoopi when she was in full flow. "You know what I think?" Whoopi said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, which somehow made her words even more devastating. "I think you're a man who spent his entire life being told he's special, being told he matters, being protected. From the real world, when that protection was taken away, when you actually had to face consequences for your choices, you couldn't handle it. So you ran. And now you're trying to rewrite history to make yourself the victim instead of taking responsibility for your own decisions." The words landed like physical blows. Harry's face crumpled, and for a moment looked exactly like the 12-year-old boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin all those years ago. Vulnerable, lost, and completely overwhelmed by forces beyond his control. "That's not," he started to say, but his voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. "That's not how it happened, isn't it?" P pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, looks like you married a woman who convinced you that your family didn't love you enough, that your country didn't appreciate you enough, that the only way to be happy was to abandon everything and everyone who had supported you your entire life. And now, when the Hollywood dream isn't quite as golden as you expected, you're selling your family's secrets to pay the bills." The silence in the studio was deafening. Harry sat frozen in his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, desperately searching for words that wouldn't come. The accusation hung in the air between them like a sword ready to fall, and everyone's present could feel the weight of this moment. This wasn't television anymore. This was psychological warfare being broadcast to millions of viewers. "I can see I've struck a nerve," Whoopi said, her voice now carrying a note of satisfaction that was almost cruel. Good, because maybe it's time someone actually challenged the fairy tale you've been selling. You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about the truth of what you've become. Harry finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You don't understand the pressure, the constant scrutiny, the way they tried to control every aspect of our lives. Control. Whoopi laughed, but there was no humor in it. Harry, you're a grown man. You were 36 years old when you made these decisions. You weren't a child being controlled by anyone. You were a Prince of England with more freedom than no Ruby kiss, no Ruby kiss. Only Ruby kiss has the luxurious kiss, kissed/bisture, and leaves a rich kef. I paired me a lef, my lovers, my lest kick. You weren't a ride/my lest/my lift, my/a left, my def, my not, comite/lies, my less, kapets, a cigarette. You will alev sit, cusset to cadet, my sides. 99% of the world's population will ever have. But somehow, that wasn't enough for you. She leaned back in her chair, studying him like a specimen under a microscope. You know what I think really happened? I think you met a woman who was used to being the star of her own show, and she couldn't handle sharing that spotlight with an entire royal family. So she convinced you that the problem wasn't her inability to adapt, it was everyone else's inability to appreciate her. Don't, Harry said, his voice cracking with emotion. Don't talk about my wife like that. You don't know her. You don't know what she went through. Whoopi's voice rose incredulously. Harry, she married into one of the most prestigious families in the world. She became a duchess overnight. She had access to resources, platforms, and opportunities that actors spend their entire careers dreaming about. What exactly did she go through that was so terrible? The racism, Harry said desperately, grasping for the familiar talking points that had served him so well in previous interviews. The way the British press treated her, the lack of support from the institution. Whoopi's expression hardened. Now you're going to sit there and lecture me about racism? Me, a black woman who's been fighting these battles since before your wife was even born. You think marrying a biracial woman gives you some kind of authority to speak on racism? The other co-hosts shifted uncomfortably. Even they seemed shocked by the brutality of Whoopi's assault. But she wasn't finished. Let me tell you something about racism, Harry. Real racism is being denied opportunities because of the color of your skin. Real racism is being followed around stores, being pulled over for driving while black, being told you're not good enough, no matter how hard you work. Real racism isn't having a tabloid write unflattering articles about you when you're living in a palace and wearing tiaras. Harry's face was flushed now, a mixture of anger and humiliation that made him look almost feverish. You're minimizing what we went through, the death threats, the invasion of privacy, the way they tried to destroy her reputation. Death threats. Whoopi scoffed. Harry, your grandmother received death threats every day for 70 years and she never ran away. Your father receives death threats. Your brother receives death threats. That comes with the territory when you're public figures. But somehow, when it happened to your wife, it was uniquely unbearable. She paused, letting the words sink in before delivering her next blow. Or maybe the real issue was that she realized being a working royal meant actually working. It meant showing up, following protocol, putting the institution before your personal desires. And that's not something she was willing to do. That's not true, Harry protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Meghan worked incredibly hard. She was committed to her role. For 18 months, Whoopi shot back. She was a working royal for 18 months before she decided it was too difficult. Most people spend longer than that in jobs they actually hate, but they stick with it because they have bills to pay and responsibilities to meet. Your wife had the greatest job security in the world, and she walked away because it wasn't fun. Enough. The cameras captured every moment of Harry's disintegration. His hands were shaking openly now, and there were tears forming in the corners of his eyes. He kept looking around the studio as if hoping someone would rescue him, but the other hosts remained silent, seemingly as mesmerized by the carnage as the viewers at home. And now look where you are, Whoopi continued relentlessly. You've traded being the spare heir to the British throne for being a spare tire in Hollywood. You've gone from opening hospitals and supporting veterans to making podcasts and writing tell-all books. How's that working out for you, Harry? Are you happier now? We're building something meaningful, Harry said, his voice barely audible. We're creating content that matters, supporting causes we believe in. Content that matters. Whoopi's laugh was sharp and bitter. Harry, you're a reality TV star now. You and your wife are the Kardashians with better accents. You've turned your family trauma into entertainment. And you're charging premium prices for the privilege of watching you destroy yourselves in public. The words hit like physical blows. Harry doubled over slightly, as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Tears were flowing freely now, and he made no attempt to hide them. The prince who had once served with distinction in Afghanistan, who had created the Invictus Games, who had been beloved by millions around the world, was reduced to a sobbing mess on national television. You want to know what the real tragedy is? Whoopi said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more force than her previous shouting. You had everything. You were Harry the hero, the people's prince, the one who could connect with ordinary folks in a way your brother never could. You had the love and respect of an entire nation, and you threw it all away for what? For Netflix money? For the approval of Hollywood celebrities who wouldn't return your calls if the cameras stopped rolling. Harry tried to speak, but only a choking sound came out. He was completely broken now, all pretense gone, all media training forgotten. This was a man confronting the wreckage of his own choices, and the weight of that realization was crushing him. Your mother would be ashamed. Whoopi said quietly, and those 4 words accomplished what all her previous attacks had failed to do. They shattered whatever was left of Harry's composure completely. He let out a sound that was part sob, part wail, a noise of pure anguish that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. His body shook with the force of his crying, and he buried his face in his hands, as if he could hide from the truth of what he had become. The studio was silent, except for the sound of Harry's breakdown. Even Whoopi seemed momentarily taken aback by the completeness of his collapse. She had broken him entirely, reduced him to his most fundamental self, stripped away every defense and excuse until only raw pain remained. She died trying to protect you from exactly this kind of exploitation, Whoopi continued, her voice now carrying a note of something that might have been pity. She fought against the press, against the system, against anyone who would use her children for their own purposes. And now you're doing it to yourself. You're selling your pain, your family's pain, your children's future privacy, all for money and attention. Harry's sobs grew louder, more desperate. He was beyond embarrassment now, beyond caring how this looked to the millions of people watching. He was a man facing the complete destruction of everything he thought he knew about himself and his choices. The saddest part, Whoopi said, delivering what felt like the final blow, is that you still don't see it. You still think you're the victim in this story? You still think everyone else is the problem? But Harry, when everyone around you is supposedly toxic, when every relationship you've had ends in conflict, when every institution you've been part of becomes your enemy, maybe it's time to look in the mirror and ask yourself what the common denominator is. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Harry's body convulsed with sobs, his carefully groomed appearance now completely disheveled. Mascara from the studio makeup ran down his cheeks in dark streaks, and his designer shirt was wrinkled from where he'd been gripping it in desperation. This wasn't the composed prince who had walked onto the set 40 minutes earlier. This was a man completely destroyed by his own contradictions. "I loved my family," he managed to choke out between sobs. "I never wanted any of this to happen. I just wanted to be happy." "No," Whoopi said firmly, her voice cutting through his, tears like a blade. "You wanted to have your cake and eat it too. You wanted to keep all the benefits of being royal while discarding all the responsibilities. You wanted the titles, the security, the platform, the respect, but you didn't want to show up for the boring stuff. You didn't want to cut ribbons and shake hands and smile when you didn't feel like it." She stood up from her chair, towering over him as he continued to sob. The camera angles captured the full drama of the moment, the powerful media personality, standing in judgment over the broken prince cowering in his seat. "You know what really gets me, Harry? You had the chance to modernize the monarchy from within. You could have been the bridge between the old ways and the new generation. You could have used your position to actually change things instead of just complaining about them. But that would have required patience, compromise, and actual work. So instead, you took the easy way out." Harry looked up at her through his tears, his face a mask of anguish and confusion. "Easy? You think this has been easy? Do you have any idea what we've sacrificed?" "Sacrificed?" Whoopi's voice rose to a near shout. "What have you sacrificed, Harry? You've made more money in the last 3 years than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. If you live in a mansion in California, your children will grow up with every privilege imaginable. What exactly have you sacrificed?" "My family," Harry whispered, the words barely audible. "I've lost my family." "No," Whoopi corrected him sharply. "You didn't lose your family, you sold them. There's a difference. You chose money and fame over family loyalty. You chose Hollywood over home. You chose your wife's ambitions over your own blood relatives. Those weren't sacrifices, Harry. Those were business decisions." The other co-hosts were frozen in their seats, their faces showing a mixture of shock and discomfort. Even by the standards of daytime television, this was brutal. Whoopi had completely abandoned any pretense of being a gracious host and had become something closer to an executioner, methodically destroying every aspect of Harry's public persona. "And now you want sympathy," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "You want people to feel sorry for you because the choices you made had consequences. You want us to believe that you're the victim here when you've spent years attacking people who can't defend themselves." Harry tried to stand up, his legs shaking so badly he could barely support his own weight. "I need to go," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't do this anymore." "Course you can't," Whoopi said, following him as he stumbled toward the edge of the set. "Because when things get difficult, you run. That's what you do. That's what you've always done. When the military got too challenging, you quit. When royal duties got too demanding, you quit. When people started asking hard questions about your choices, you quit. And now, when someone finally holds you accountable for your actions, you're quitting again." Harry turned back to face her, tears streaming down his face, his voice cracking with emotion. "You don't understand the pressure. You don't know what it's like to have the whole world watching your every move, judging everything you do." "I don't understand pressure." Whoopi laughed bitterly. "Harry, I'm a black woman who built a career in an industry that didn't want me. I've been criticized, attacked, and dismissed more times than you can count. But I never ran away. I never sold out the people who supported me. I never turned my back on my community when things got tough." She moved closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than her previous shouting. "The difference between us, Harry, is that I earned everything I have. You were born into everything you had, and you threw It away because it wasn't enough. Because you're not enough. Those final words hit Harry like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face contorting with pain and rage and desperation. "Stop," he pleaded. "Please, just stop." "Why should I stop?" Whoopi demanded. "Nobody stopped you when you were destroying your family's reputation. Nobody stopped you when you were exposing private conversations and betraying confidences. Nobody stopped you when you were teaching your children that family loyalty is negotiable if the price is right. So why should I stop now?" Harry looked around the studio wildly, searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of his complete breakdown. The other hosts were staring at him with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. The crew members were frozen in place, unsure whether to intervene or let this train wreck continue to its inevitable conclusion. "You want to know what your real legacy will be?" Whoopi asked, moving in for the final kill. "It won't be your military service or your charity work or your advocacy for mental health. It will be that you were the prince who gave up his birthright for a Netflix deal. You'll be remembered as the man who chose Hollywood over his own family, who chose money over loyalty, who chose fame over duty." Harry let out a sound that was barely human, a wail of pure anguish that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He turned away from Whoopi and stumbled toward the exit, his legs barely able to carry him. But she wasn't finished with him yet. "Your children will grow up knowing that their father was willing to sell out his own family for money," she called after him. "They'll read the books, watch the interviews, see the Netflix shows, and they'll know that when your family needed you most, when your father was dealing with cancer, when your brother was trying to hold the monarchy together, you were in California, counting your money and planning your next tell-all project." Harry stopped at the edge of the set, his hand on the exit door, his entire body shaking with the force of his sobs. He turned back one final time, his face streaked with tears and makeup, his eyes wild with pain and fury. "I loved them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I loved them all." "No," Whoopi said with finality. "You loved the idea of them. You loved what they could do for you, what they represented, what they could give you. But when it came time to actually love them, to put their needs before your own, to protect them instead of exploiting them, you couldn't do it. Because love requires sacrifice, Harry, real sacrifice. And you've never been willing to sacrifice anything that really mattered to you." With that final devastating blow, Harry pushed through the exit door and fled the studio, leaving behind the wreckage of his public image and any remaining shred of dignity he might have possessed. The cameras followed him as far as they could, capturing his desperate flight from the scene of his complete humiliation. Whoopi stood in the center of the set, breathing heavily from the intensity of the confrontation, her face showing no remorse for what she had just done. She had systematically destroyed one of the most famous men in the world, and she looked satisfied with her work. The studio fell silent, except for the distant sound of Harry's sobs echoing from the corridor beyond. The set. It was over. The prince had been reduced to nothing more than a broken man fleeing from the truth of his own choices. What did you think of this confrontation? Was Whoopi too harsh? Or was this the accountability Harry needed to face? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories about the dramatic moments that happen when public figures are forced to confront the reality of their actions.